You know how sometimes a simple home repair job can completely change your life? Well, that's exactly what happened to me last month, when I knocked on Vivian Harrington's door to fix her rotting deck. I thought I was just there to replace some warped boards and tighten a few loose railings. What I didn't expect was for a 51-year-old widow to look me straight in the eye 3 days later and say the words that would turn both our worlds upside down. "I'm 51 and I've never felt this way before." By the time I left her house a week later, I wasn't just a different handyman. I was a different man entirely. This is that story. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Name is Declan Rossi. And if you're wondering how a 38-year-old former mechanical engineer ended up crawling under decks and fixing broken railings, well, that's a story of its own. 3 years ago, I had what you might call a spectacular life implosion. Lost my job at an aerospace company when they downsized. Went through a messy divorce that left me with half my savings and a bruised ego, and somehow found myself living in a cramped studio apartment in Millbrook Heights, a small town about an hour outside the city, where I used to have what I thought was my dream life. The transition from designing aircraft components to wielding a hammer wasn't exactly in my 5-year plan, but life has a funny way of teaching you that plans are more like suggestions anyway. I'd always been good with my hands. My grandfather taught me carpentry when I was a kid, back when I thought manual labor was something you did until you got a real job. Turns out, there's something deeply satisfying about fixing things that are broken, about taking something that's falling apart and making it whole again. Maybe I was trying to fix more than just other people's homes. Millbrook Heights is one of those towns where everyone knows everyone, where the local diner still serves coffee in actual ceramic mugs, and where people wave at you even if they're not sure who you are. It's the kind of place I would have turned my nose up at during my corporate days. But now it felt like exactly what I needed, a place to rebuild. To figure out who I was when I stripped away the job title and the marriage certificate, and all the other labels that used to define me. I'd been building a modest reputation as the guy who actually showed up on time and didn't overcharge for simple fixes. Word travels fast in small towns, especially when you're reliable and honest, apparently. Both qualities are rarer in the handyman business than you'd think. Most of my jobs came through referrals, and that's how I ended up with Vivian Harrington's. Address scribbled on a piece of paper along with a note that said "Deck repair urgent." The Harrington house sat on Maple Street, one of those tree-lined roads where the houses were built in the 1960s and still had that solid, no-nonsense architecture that said these homes were meant to last. It had large front yards, attached garages, and the kind of mature landscaping that only comes with decades of careful tending. Vivian's house was a modest 2-story colonial painted in sage green with white trim, surrounded by flower beds that looked like they'd been planned by someone who actually knew what they were doing. As I pulled my truck into the driveway that Tuesday morning, I noticed the deck immediately. It wrapped around the back of the house. It was probably built as an addition sometime in the 80s, and it was definitely showing its age. Several boards were warped beyond saving. The railing wobbled when you touched it, and I could see from 50 feet away that the support posts needed attention. It was the kind of job that would take a few days to do right, which meant steady work and a decent paycheck. Exactly what I needed. I grabbed my toolbox and clipboard and headed for the front door, rehearsing the professional spiel I'd perfected. Over the past couple of years, assess the damage, provide an honest estimate, set realistic expectations about timeline and cost. Keep it friendly, but not too personal. Get the job done, get paid, move on to the next one. Simple. The woman who answered the door didn't fit any of my usual client categories. Vivian Harrington was probably 51 or 52. The shoulder-length auburn hair that had natural silver streaks she wasn't trying to hide, and the kind of direct green eyes that suggested she didn't have time for nonsense. She was wearing dark jeans and a cream-colored sweater that looked expensive but practical. And when she shook my hand, her grip was firm and confident. "You must be Declan," she said, stepping aside to let me in. "I'm Vivian. Thanks for coming out so quickly." Her voice had a slight rasp to it, like someone who'd been a smoker once but quit years ago. and there was something in her manner that suggested she was used to handling things herself. The house backed up that impression. Everything was clean and organized, but not in that sterile way that some people maintain. It felt lived in and comfortable, with built-in bookshelves lined with actual books, family photos that looked recent and genuine, and the kind of furniture that was chosen for comfort rather than to impress visitors. The deck's out back. She continued, leading me through a kitchen that smelled faintly of coffee and something that might have been banana bread. I should probably warn you, it's in pretty rough shape. I've been putting off dealing with it for about 2 years, which I know was stupid, but she paused at the sliding glass door that led to the deck, her hand on the handle. Well, there were other priorities. There was something in the way she said that last part that made me look at her more carefully. In my experience, when people talked about other priorities in that particular tone, it usually meant something significant had happened. Illness, divorce, death in the family. The kind of life events that push home maintenance to the bottom of the list because you're too busy just trying to survive. But I'd learned not to pry. People told you what they wanted you to know, and my job was to fix their deck, not their life story. Let's take a look, I said, stepping out onto the deck behind her, already mentally cataloging the work that needed to be done, and wondering what story this particular repair job would tell. The deck was worse than I'd expected. What had looked like routine maintenance from a distance turned out to be a serious safety hazard up close. Several boards gave slightly under my weight. The support beam on the east corner had a crack running halfway through it, and the railing was so loose I could wiggle it with one hand. This wasn't just cosmetic, where this was a deck that could seriously hurt someone if they put their full weight in the wrong place. Jesus, I muttered, crouching down to examine one of the worst boards. Vivian, when's the last time you actually used this deck? She stood in the doorway, arms crossed, watching me poke and prod at her problems. About 6 months ago, maybe longer. I stopped trusting it after I heard it creak when my neighbor Karen's son was over here helping me move some planters.
Yes.
I looked up at her. You've been avoiding your own deck for 6 months because you thought it might collapse? Well, when you put it like that, it sounds ridiculous. She stepped carefully onto one of the boards I'd already tested. But yes, essentially. I stood up, brushing sawdust off my hands. This isn't just about replacing a few boards, Vivian. Its whole structure needs to be rebuilt. The support system is compromised. Half these planks are rotted through, and honestly, I'm surprised it's held up this long. She was quiet for a moment, looking out at her backyard, which I noticed was beautifully maintained despite the deck situation. Flower beds that were clearly tended with care, a small vegetable garden that looked like it had been recently weeded, and a bird bath that was obviously cleaned regularly. How much are we talking about? She asked finally. I did. Some quick math in my head, factoring in materials, labor, and the fact that I'd probably need at least a week to do it right. Honestly, it's probably around 4,000, maybe 4,500. I know that's not what you wanted to hear. She didn't flinch at the number, which surprised me. Most people at least winced when I gave them estimates that big. How long would it take? If I work alone, probably 6 or 7 days. I could bring in a partner to speed things up, but that would increase the cost. Vivian was quiet again, and I could see her running calculations in her head. I'd learned to recognize that, look, people weighing what they could afford against what they actually needed. Trying to figure out if there was a way to make the numbers work. Can you start Monday? She asked. That caught me off guard. Usually, there was more negotiation, more questions about whether we could do it cheaper or faster or with different materials. Monday's fine, I said, but are you sure? That's a significant investment. Most people want to think about it, maybe get a second estimate. She turned to look at me directly, and there was something in her expression that I couldn't quite read. Determination, maybe, or resignation, something else entirely. Declan, she said, I'm 51 years old. My husband died 18 months ago after a 2-year battle with cancer. During those 2 years, everything that wasn't directly related to his care or my job got pushed aside. The deck, the gutters, the front steps that stick when it rains, all of it. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I told myself I'd deal with it later after ... after. I felt that familiar tightness in my chest that came whenever clients started sharing the heavy stuff. Not because I didn't care, but because I cared too much. And I'd learned that getting emotionally invested in every client's story was a fast track to burnout. "I'm sorry," I said, and I meant it. "Thank you." The point is, I spent 2 years putting everything on hold, and then after David passed, I spent another 6 months just trying to figure out how to be a person again. And now I'm tired of living like I'm waiting for my life to start over. This deck. She gestured at the sorry collection of rotting wood beneath our feet. "This deck is where David and I used to have coffee every morning. It's where I used to read books on Sunday afternoons. It's where we planned our garden and talked about retirement and watched the neighbors' kids grow up." She paused, and I could see her working to keep her voice steady. "I want it back. Ain't the way it was, because it was never going to be the way it was. But I want a deck where I can sit and have my coffee and remember the good parts without feeling like everything is falling apart around me." I looked at her standing there in her practical sweater and jeans, silver streaks catching the morning light, and I realized I was seeing something I didn't encounter very often in this job. Someone who knew exactly what they wanted and why they wanted it. "I can do that," I said. "I can build you a deck that'll last another 20 years. "Good," she smiled. For the first time since I'd arrived, and it transformed her entire face. Wow, because honestly, Declan, and all the contractors and handymen I've dealt with over the years, and there have been quite a few, you're the first one who's talked to me like I'm a person instead of just a checkbook with problems." There it was. Not the exact words from my title, but close enough that I felt that little jolt of recognition you get when someone says something that hits differently than you expected. Most of my clients saw me as a necessary expense, a service provider, someone to fix their problems and disappear. But there was something in the way Vivian said it that made me think she saw something else entirely. I said, trying to keep things light. "Most checkbooks don't make banana bread. That smells that good." She laughed, a real laugh that reached her eyes. "You noticed that, did you? I may have been testing you. Anyone who doesn't comment on fresh-baked goods is probably not someone I want spending a week in my backyard." Smart strategy. Did I pass? "See, come back Monday morning around 8, and I'll have coffee ready. Fair warning, though, I work from home, so I'll probably be hovering more than most clients. I promise I'm not usually a micromanager, but this deck, it matters." "Understood. And hovering is fine. It's your house." As I packed up my tools and headed back to my truck, I found myself looking forward to Monday in a way that had nothing to do with the paycheck. There was something about Vivian Harrington that intrigued me. The way she'd laid out exactly what she wanted without apology. The way she'd shared her story without making it my responsibility to fix anything beyond the deck. The way she'd made me feel like a craftsman instead of just hired help. I had no idea yet how much that feeling was going to matter. Monday morning came with that crisp October air that makes you believe anything is possible. I pulled up to Vivian's house at exactly 8 o'clock, his truck loaded with lumber, tools, and enough coffee to fuel a construction crew. True to her word, she was waiting with a steaming mug and what looked like a fresh batch of those muffins I'd been smelling all weekend in my imagination. "Right on time," she said, handing me the coffee. "I like that in a contractor. I like that in a client," I replied, taking a sip. It was good coffee, the kind that came from actual beans, not a can. Another point in Vivian's favor. I was about to head around back to start unloading when a voice called out from the house next door, well. Looks like Vivian finally decided to tackle that death trap." The voice belonged to a woman who appeared to be in her mid-60s, with short silver hair and the kind of bright pink sweatshirt that suggested she wasn't afraid of being noticed. She was standing on her own perfectly maintained deck coffee, mug in hand, grinning like she'd been waiting for this exact moment. "Declan, meet my neighbor Karen Sidney," Vivian said, with the tone of someone introducing a force of nature. "Karen, this is Declan Rossi, the handyman I told you about." Karen practically bounced down from her deck and over to where we were standing. "Oh, good. Someone who actually knows what they're doing. Do you know how many so-called contractors I've watched come and go from this neighborhood? Last month alone, I saw 3 different guys give estimates on the Petersons' roof, and I swear 2 of them had never seen a hammer before. She turned to Vivian. Remember that disaster with the Clyde's bathroom renovation? The poor man is still trying to get his shower to work properly. Karen keeps tabs on all the home improvement projects in a 6-block radius, Vivian explained. And I could tell this was said with both affection and mild exasperation. She's like our neighborhood construction watchdog. Someone has to be, Karen declared. You wouldn't believe the number of people who get taken advantage of by fly-by-night contractors. But you, she pointed at me, you come recommended by the Andersons on Pine Street. Hey, they said you fixed their stairs and didn't try to sell them a whole new staircase they didn't need. I nodded. The Andersons were good people. Just needed some new treads and a railing repair. Exactly, Kieran beamed like I'd just solved world hunger. Honest work for honest prices. That's what this neighborhood needs. Just then, another voice joined the conversation. Are we having a committee meeting? About Vivian's deck? The speaker was a man who looked to be in his early 40s, wearing khakis and a polo shirt that suggested he worked. Somewhere with a dress code but wasn't quite management level, he was carrying what appeared to be a homemade casserole dish. Peter Clyde, Vivian said, meet Declan. Declan Peter lives 2 houses down and apparently thinks I need feeding. Peter looked slightly embarrassed, but held up the dish anyway. Anna made extra lasagna last night, and you know how she gets when there's food going to waste. Plus she figured if you're going to have construction noise all week, the least we could do was make sure you don't have to cook. Anna's wife, Karen, explained to me in a stage whisper. Oh, she's a saint. Runs the community garden program, and somehow manages to keep 3 teenagers fed and clothed. The woman's a miracle worker. She's also standing right here. Came a voice from behind Peter. Anna Clyde appeared, wiping her hands on a dish towel. She was probably 38 or 39, with the kind of practical brown hair that suggested she didn't have time for complicated styling, and laugh lines that made her instantly approachable. I wanted to meet the brave soul who's tackling Vivian's deck, she said, extending a hand on a Clyde. I live down the street with this one, she gestured at Peter, and our 3 human tornadoes. Declan Rossi, and brave might be the wrong word. Maybe foolhardy. Oh, you'll be fine, Anna said with a wave. Vivian's one of the good ones. Bred us soup every day for a week when I had the flu last winter, and she's never once complained about our kid's ball landing in her yard. Unlike some people, Karen muttered, shooting a look toward a house I couldn't see. Karen, Vivian warned. What? The Harringtons are lovely neighbors? I'm just saying if more people were like Vivian, this would be a much more pleasant street to live on. I was starting to get a picture of the neighborhood dynamics. Karen was obviously the unofficial mayor. Anna was the community caretaker. Peter seemed like the practical problem solver, and Vivian was apparently the favorite. Well, I said, I should probably get started if I'm going to earn all this goodwill. You need any help? Peter asked. I'm pretty handy with tools, and I'm working from home today anyway. I was about to politely decline. I'd learned that well-meaning neighbors could sometimes slow a job down more than they helped when I saw the hopeful look on his face. In a town this size, being the guy who helped with the big projects probably carried some social currency. You know what? I could use someone to help me carry the lumber around back. Save me about a dozen trips. Peter's face lit up. Great. Just let me change into something I can get dirty. As he jogged back toward his house, Karen turned to me with a conspiratorial air. Peter's a good man, but he's been a little restless. Lately, got passed over for a promotion at work a few months ago, and I think he's been looking for ways to feel useful. Helping you build this deck will probably do him more good than it does you. I was beginning to understand that Karen Sidney wasn't just the neighborhood watchdog. She was also something of a social coordinator, keeping track of who needed what and making sure people found ways to help each other. I said, building a deck is definitely more fun with help. That's what I like to hear, Anna said. And if you need anything, cold drinks, sandwiches, first aid supplies for when Peter inevitably hits his thumb with a hammer, just holler. I heard that. Peter called from his front door. You were supposed to? Anna called back, grinning. As the neighbors dispersed to let me get to work, Vivian lingered on the deck. I should probably warn you, she said quietly. Once word gets out that we're doing a major project, half the street is going to find excuses to wander over and check on our progress. It's not nosiness exactly, it's just ... We all kind of look out for each other around here. It sounds nice, actually. I'm used to working alone. It is nice, she agreed. When David was sick, I don't know what I would have done without them. Karen organized a meal train that lasted 6 months. Anna drove me to doctor's appointments when I was too exhausted to trust myself behind the wheel. Peter fixed my garbage disposal and wouldn't let me pay him for parts. She paused, looking out at the yards where she could probably tell you the story behind every garden and every repair. I guess what I'm saying is, this deck isn't just for me. It's for all of us, in a way. This is where we gather for impromptu barbecues, and where the kids come to show off their scraped knees, and where Karen holds court with her morning coffee gossip sessions. I looked at the broken planks and sagging railings with new understanding. This wasn't just about giving Vivian a place to remember her husband. This was about rebuilding a community gathering space, and we better make sure we build it right. I said, I was hoping you'd say that. By the time Peter returned in work clothes, and we started hauling lumber, I realized this job was going to be different from anything I'd done before. Not just because of the scope of the work, but because of the people. For the first time since I'd started doing this kind of work, I felt like I was building something that mattered beyond just the structure itself. I had no idea how right I was. By Tuesday afternoon, Peter and I had developed a surprisingly efficient working rhythm. He turned out to be one of those people who was genuinely handy, not just weekend warrior handy, but actually skilled. He could read a level, knew which end of a circular saw to hold, and best of all, he worked without feeling the need to fill every silence with conversation. We'd spent the morning tearing out the old deck boards, and the pile of rotted lumber in Vivian's driveway was growing impressively. Every plank we pulled up revealed more problems underneath: rusted bolts, cracked support beams, and in one corner, what looked suspiciously like termite damage. This deck was a disaster waiting to happen, Peter said, wiping sweat from his forehead. As we surveyed the skeletal frame that remained, I can't believe it held up as long as it did. Sometimes things hang on longer than they should, Vivian said from the doorway. Where she'd been watching our progress between work calls, she was holding a pitcher of what looked like fresh lemonade, and the sight of it made me realize how thirsty demolition work could make you. Lucky for us, I said, accepting a glass. Otherwise, you might have had a much bigger problem on your hands. Or a lawsuit, Peter added. If someone had gotten hurt, Vivian's expression darkened slightly. That's exactly what I was afraid of. David always handled the maintenance around here. And after he got sick, she trailed off, looking at the exposed frame posts. I guess I just kept hoping it would last a little longer. There was something in her voice that made me look at her more carefully. It wasn't just about the deck, I realized. It was about all the things she'd been hoping would last a little longer. Well, I said, we're going to make sure the new one outlasts us all. She smiled at that, but I caught something vulnerable in her expression, for she turned to go back inside. Peter waited until she was out of earshot before speaking. She's been through a lot, he said quietly. David's illness was ... rough. Really rough. Near the end, he was in hospice care here at the house, and Vivian basically didn't leave his side for 3 months. I kept working, but I was listening. Whole neighborhood tried to help, but she's ... proud, you know. Dependent. She'd accept meals and rides to the pharmacy, but she wouldn't let anyone else take care of him. Said it was her job. That sounds like her, I said, thinking about how she'd insisted on hovering during the work. Not because she didn't trust me, but because she needed to be involved. After he passed, Peter continued, we all kept waiting for her to break down. You know, to need something? But she just kept going. Went back to work, tended her garden, participated in neighborhood stuff, like nothing had changed. But things had changed. Everything had changed. You can see it sometimes when she doesn't think anyone's looking. She'll be laughing at something Karen said, and then suddenly she'll get this expression, like she'll just remember it all over again that he's not there. I understood that feeling better than I wanted to admit. The moments when you forgot, briefly, that your life had been turned upside down, and then reality came crashing back. Is that why everyone's so invested in this deck project? I asked Peter. Nodded. Karen thinks it's therapeutic. Anna thinks Vivian needs a project that's just for her, not connected to grief or memory. I think, ... double quotes, considering his words. I think maybe we all just want to give her something good, something that's about moving forward instead of holding on. Around 3 o'clock, Anna arrived with sandwiches and the kind of chocolate. Chip cookies that suggested she'd been baking to avoid doing something else. How's the patient? She asked, surveying our demolition work. Sicker than we thought, I said, but nothing that can't be fixed with enough lumber and stubbornness. Good thing stubbornness is something we've got plenty of around here. Ain't she? Handed out sandwiches and settled onto Vivian's back steps. So, Declan, what's your story? Peter mentioned you used to be an engineer. I'd been wondering when someone would ask. In a neighborhood like this, a new face working on a major project was bound to generate curiosity. Aerospace engineering, I said. Worked for Morrison Dynamics for about 12 years, until they decided they needed fewer engineers and more profit margins. Ouch, Anna said. It's got to be rough, starting over in a completely different field. Honestly, it was terrifying at first. I'd never done anything but engineering work, but there's something satisfying about this kind of job that I never got sitting behind a computer all day. What kind of something? Vivian had rejoined us, settling on the steps next to Anna. I thought about how to explain it. With engineering, you design something, run it through computer simulations, hand it off to manufacturing, and hope it works. With this, I gestured at the half-demolished deck. You're actually building the thing with your own hands. When I'm done here, I'll be able to point to this deck and say I built that, and it'll still be here 20 years from now, assuming we don't get termites again, Peter said. We're not getting termites again, I said firmly. I'm treating every piece of wood like it's going into a yacht. Vivian laughed. You know, David would have loved watching this project. He was always talking about rebuilding this deck himself, but he never quite got around to it. Too many other projects, too many other priorities. What kind of work did he do? I asked. High school history teacher, she said, and her whole face softened when she talked about him. 32 years at the same school. He loved those kids, even the ones who drove him crazy. Every year he'd say he was going to retire, and every year he'd meet a new group of students and decide to stick around for just one more year. Sounds like a good man, I said. He was. He was also the kind of person who would start 10 projects and finish 3 of them. Our garage is still full of half-completed woodworking experiments and garden gadgets that were supposed to revolutionize something or other. That's what garages are for, Peter said. I've got a workshop full of projects that Anna pretends not to notice. I notice, Anna said dryly. I just choose not to comment on the bicycle you've been fixing for 8 months. It's a complex problem. It needs a new chain, Peter. As we sat there trading stories about unfinished projects and the things we told ourselves we'd get around, to someday I realized something was happening that I hadn't expected. These people were becoming real to me. Not just the folks who lived next to my current job site, but actual people with their own stories and struggles and the kind of everyday humor that makes life bearable. And Vivian, ... There was something about the way she talked about her husband, the way she listened when other people spoke, the way she'd quietly made sure everyone had enough lemonade. That made me understand why this neighborhood had rallied around her. She was the kind of person who made space for other people to be themselves. I should probably get back to work, I said eventually, though I was reluctant to break up the impromptu gathering. We should all get back to work, Anna said, but she didn't move from the steps. 5 more minutes, Vivian said. It's nice having people around during the day. The house gets quiet when it's just me. And there it was, the first real glimpse of the loneliness she'd been carrying. Not dramatic or self-pitying, just honest. It's just human. Well, I said, you're going to have plenty of noise for the rest of the week. Fair warning, tomorrow we start framing, and that's when things get loud. I'm looking forward to it, she said, and I believed her as I picked up my tools too. Get back to work. I caught myself thinking that maybe Peter was right. Maybe this project was about more than just replacing rotten wood. Maybe it was about building something that would bring people together, something that would give Vivian a reason to use her backyard again, something that would last. I was beginning to understand that the stakes here were higher than I'd initially thought, and that was both exciting and terrifying. Wednesday evening found me sitting on Vivian's back steps, sharing a beer and watching the sun set over what was slowly becoming a real deck again. We'd made good progress. The new frame was up, the support posts were solid, and tomorrow we'd start laying the actual decking boards. Peter had gone home to help his kids with homework, and the neighborhood had settled into that peaceful quiet you only get in small towns. You know, Vivian said, taking a sip from her own beer, I haven't sat back here in the evening in, God, it must be almost 2 years. Why not? She was quiet for a moment, looking out at her garden, where the last of the fall flowers were stubbornly hanging on despite the cooling nights. At first, it was because David was too sick to come outside. The chemo made him so sensitive to everything, light, sound, even the smell of the flowers he used to love. So he stayed inside, and I guess I just stopped thinking of this as a place I could be. She paused, rolling the beer bottle between her palms. After he died, I tried to come out here a few times, but it felt wrong somehow. Like I was trespassing on our memories. Does that make sense? It makes perfect sense, I said, and I meant it. After my divorce, I couldn't listen to certain songs for months, couldn't go to the restaurant where we had our first date. Sometimes moving forward means avoiding the places that hurt. Exactly. But then I realized I was avoiding more and more places. The deck, then the garden, then even parts of the house. I was shrinking my world down to just the safe spaces, and pretty soon there weren't many of those left. I could hear something in her voice, not self-pity, but a kind of honest recognition of how grief could make you smaller if you let it. Is that why you decided to fix the deck? To reclaim the space? Partly she took another sip of beer, but also because I was tired of being afraid. Afraid of the memories, afraid of being alone with them, afraid of she hesitated, afraid of, what? Afraid of forgetting him? Which sounds crazy, right? You'd think the memories would be the one thing you'd want to hold on to, but sometimes holding on to them hurts too much, I said. Yes, exactly that. She looked at me with something like relief. People don't usually understand that. They think grief is just sadness, but it's more complicated. Sometimes it's guilt for laughing at something. Sometimes it's anger at him for leaving. Sometimes it's this weird panic that if I'm not actively grieving, I'm somehow betraying what we had. I nodded, thinking about my own complicated feelings after my marriage ended. The guilt over feeling relieved sometimes. The anger at myself for not fighting harder. The strange grief for the future I'd thought I was building. David and I used to sit out here every morning with our coffee, she continued. He'd read me interesting bits from the newspaper, and I'd tell him about whatever book I was reading. Such a simple thing, but it was ours, you know? Our ritual. Have you tried doing it since? Once about 6 months ago, I made coffee, came out here with my book, and she shrugged, fell apart, ugly crying, the whole thing. Karen found me out here an hour later and probably thought I'd lost my mind. Grief doesn't have a timeline, I said, and it doesn't follow rules. That's what the grief counselor said. There's no wrong way to grieve, she kept telling me. But there sure feels like there are a lot of wrong ways to live afterward. We sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes, watching the sky fade from orange to purple. Somewhere in the distance, someone was grilling dinner, and the smell of charcoal and cooking meat drifted over the fence. Can I ask you something? Vivian said suddenly. Sure. What made you want to fix things for a living? I mean, after being an engineer, you could have found another office job. Why this? I thought about how to answer that honestly. It's because things that are broken can actually be fixed, I said finally. With engineering, you're always working with theoretical problems, hypothetical solutions. But when someone's deck is falling apart, you can actually make it better. You can take something that's dangerous or ugly or useless and turn it into something solid and beautiful and functional. Is that what you're doing here? Fixing me? The question caught me off guard. I said quickly, You're not broken, Vivian. You're grieving, which is completely different. Sometimes it doesn't feel different. I know, but broken things can't function at all. You're functioning. You're working. You're taking care of your neighbors. You're making decisions about your house and your future. That's not broken. That's healing. She was quiet for a long moment. You know, Declan, in the 18 months since David died, You're the first person who's talked to me like I'm still a whole person. Everyone else treats me like I'm fragile, like I might shatter if they say the wrong thing, because they're afraid of their own grief," I said. "Watching someone else go through loss forces you to think about what you'd do if it happened to you. Is that what happened with your divorce? People not knowing how to act around you? Some of them. Others just picked sides. In a small town, divorce can be almost as isolating as death, just in different ways. I'm sorry, that must have been lonely." It was, but it also taught me that you can't wait for other people to give you permission to rebuild your life. Eventually, you have to decide for yourself that you're ready to try again. Vivian looked at me then with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Is that what you're doing here? Trying again?" "Maybe. I didn't realize it when I started, but yeah, maybe I am." The last light faded from the sky. We gathered up our empty bottles and headed inside. At the back door, Vivian stopped. "Declan, thank you. For the deck, for treating me like a person instead of a tragedy. Thank you for letting me." As I drove home that night, I realized something had shifted between us. We weren't just contractor and client anymore, or even friends. We were two people who had experienced loss and were trying to figure out how to live with it. And somehow, in the process of rebuilding her deck, we were both learning how to rebuild something else entirely. Thursday morning started like any other day of the project, except for the fact that when I pulled up to Vivian's house, there was a white pickup truck parked in her driveway that I didn't recognize. Not just any pickup truck, one of those oversized, chrome-heavy monsters that screamed, "I have something to prove." The kind of truck that took up to parking spaces and had never hauled anything heavier than groceries. I grabbed my coffee and toolbox and headed around back, where I found Vivian standing on the partially completed deck, talking to a man in his 50s wearing a polo shirt that was trying too hard to look casual. He had that particular combination of fake tan and expensive watch that usually meant either car sales or real estate. "Oh good, you're here," Vivian said when she saw me, and there was something in her voice that suggested relief.
Declan?
"Is Oscar Harrington. He says he's from the city planning office." Oscar turned to look at me with the kind of smile that didn't reach his eyes. "And you must be the contractor. I was just explaining to Mrs. Harrington that there might be some issues with this construction project." I set down my toolbox and extended a hand. "Declan Rossi. What kind of issues?" His handshake was the aggressive type too firm held to. "Well, Mr. Rossi, it appears that the proper permits weren't filed for this deck reconstruction. The city requires permits for any structural work over a certain square footage, and this deck definitely qualifies." "I pulled permits," I said. "Filed them 2 weeks ago. Should have the approvals by early next week." "Ah, but that's the problem," Oscar said, pulling a folder from under his arm. "The permits you filed were for deck repair, not reconstruction. What you're doing here clearly constitutes new construction, which requires a different level of permitting and inspection." I looked at the papers he was showing me. They looked official enough, but something felt off. In 3 years of doing this work, I'd never had a city planning official show up at a job site unannounced, especially not one driving a $60,000 truck. "I'm sorry," I said, "but who did you say you were again?" "Oscar Harrington." "Millbrook Heights Planning and Zoning," he said smoothly. "I received a complaint about unpermitted construction at this address." "A complaint from who?" "I'm not at liberty to say. Anonymous complaints are taken seriously by the city." Vivian crossed her arms. "This is ridiculous." Declan filed all the proper paperwork. "I have copies. Mrs. Harrington, I understand your frustration, but rules are rules. This construction needs to stop immediately until the proper permits are obtained and approved. That process typically takes 6 to 8 weeks. 8 weeks? Vivian's voice rose. "For a deck? For new construction? Yes. There are environmental impact studies, neighbor notification requirements, structural engineering reviews." Getting a bad feeling about this whole situation. "Mr. Harrington, can I see your identification?" For just a second, Oscar's confident demeanor flickered. "I'm sorry. Your city ID badge, credentials, something official? I don't carry a badge. I'm not a police officer, Mr. Rossi. I'm a city planning official. Right, but you'd have some kind of official identification, wouldn't you? Photo ID with the city seal, something like that? Oscar's smile was getting more strained. I assure you, I'm exactly who I say I am. I'm telling you that this construction is in violation of city ordinances. Just then, Karen's voice called out from next door. Vivian, is everything all right? Over there? We're fine, Karen, Vivian called back, but Karen was already making her way over, followed by Peter, who must have seen the commotion from his window. What's going on? Peter asked. This gentleman says we don't have the proper permits for the deck, Vivian explained. Karen looked Oscar up, down with the practiced eye of someone who dealt with her share of door-to-door salesmen and questionable repair offers. And you are? Oscar Harrington, City Planning, he said, but his confidence was definitely slipping now that he had an audience. Harrington? Karen's eyebrows went up. That's interesting, because I know everyone who works for the city, and I don't recall anyone named Harrington in planning and zoning. I'm new, Oscar said quickly. How new? Peter asked. Because I just had to deal with the planning office last month for my garage addition, and they mentioned they were short-staffed, not hiring.
Oh.
I could see Oscar starting to sweat slightly. Look, we can debate my credentials all day, but the fact remains that this construction is illegal without proper permits. You know what? I said, pulling out my phone. Why don't we just call the planning office and sort this out right now? Clear up any confusion. That's not necessary, I insist, I said, already dialing. Hi, this is Declan Rossi. I'm a contractor working on a deck project on Maple Street, and I have someone here claiming to be from your office. No, I filed permits 2 weeks ago for the Harrington property. Yes, that's right. No, he says his name is Oscar Harrington. I looked up at Oscar, who was now definitely sweating. They'd like to speak with you. I don't have time for this, Oscar said, backing toward the gate. The construction stops now, or I'll be back with a cease and desist order. Called after him. If you're from the city, where's your city vehicle? Why are you driving a personal truck? But Oscar was already jogging toward his oversized pickup. Folder clutched under his arm. I finished my phone call and looked at the group. Well, that was interesting. The real planning office has never heard of Oscar Harrington, and my permits are actually ahead of schedule for approval. So who was he? Anna asked. She'd appeared sometime during the confrontation, probably drawn. By the raised voices? No idea, I said, but I'm betting he's not really concerned about our permit status. Vivian looked shaken. But why would someone pretend to be from the city? What would be the point? Peter and Karen exchanged a look. Vivian, Karen said gently, has anyone approached you recently about selling your house? Well, yes, but... Oh... Understanding dawned on her face. You think this is about the development company? What development company? I asked. Some outfit called Brookstone Development, Peter explained. They've been trying to buy up properties in this neighborhood. For months. They want to tear down the older houses and build some kind of luxury townhome complex. Most people aren't interested in selling, Anna added, so they've been getting more... creative in their approaches. Creative how? Sudden property tax. Reassessments that seem designed to price people out, Karen said grimly. Mysterious problems with utility connections. And now, apparently, fake city officials trying to shut down home improvement projects. Looked around at the group, all of them nodding grimly. How many people have they approached? About half. The neighborhood, Vivian said. They offered me 3 times what the house is worth. But, she gestured around at her garden, her neighbors, the half-built deck. This is my home.
Oh.
Well, I said, picking up my tools, then I guess we better finish this deck before they try anything else. As we got back to work, I couldn't shake the feeling that we'd just gotten our first real look at an opponent who was willing to play dirty. And if that was the case, this simple deck project was about to become something much more complicated. That evening, Vivian's kitchen had transformed into what looked like a war room. Karen had arrived with a stack of folders that she claimed contained everything we need to know about these Brookstone vultures. Anna brought homemade pizza and the kind of determination that comes from protecting your family. Peter showed up with a laptop and a notepad, ready to take what he called official meeting minutes. Even some neighbors I hadn't met before started filtering in. Apparently word traveled fast on Maple Street. "All right," Karen said, spreading papers across Vivian's dining table. "Let's figure out what we're really dealing with here." I found myself in the unusual position of being part of a neighborhood planning committee. Something I'd never expected when I'd signed up to build a deck. But looking around at these people I'd come to care about over the past few days, realized I was exactly where I wanted to be. "So what do we know about Brookstone development?" Anna asked, settling into a chair with a notebook of her own. "More than I wish we did," said a woman I hadn't met before. She was probably in her early 60s, with gray hair pulled back in, a practical ponytail, and the kind of direct gaze that suggested she didn't suffer fools. "I'm Roxanne Clyde, by the way," she said to me. "I live 3 blocks over, but Karen called and said you all could use some help." Roxanne used to work for the county assessor's office, Karen explained. "She knows how to dig up information on companies." "And Brookstone is interesting," Roxanne continued, pulling out her own folder. "They're based out of the city, but they're funded by a larger development group that's been buying up small-town properties all over the state. Their pattern is always the same: identify older neighborhoods close to urban centers, buy up as many properties as possible, then rezone and build high-density housing." "What's wrong with that?" Peter asked. "I mean, theoretically, it's nothing if they played fair," Roxanne said. "But they don't. They use intimidation tactics, legal harassment, and sometimes outright fraud to pressure people into selling." "Fake city official you met today? It's right out of their playbook." Vivian looked around the table. "So what happened today wasn't random. Not even close," Karen said. "I did some calling around after Oscar left. 3 other families in the neighborhood have gotten similar visits in the past month. Fake health inspectors, bogus building code violations, even someone claiming to be from the fire department. The goal is to make homeownership feel impossible," Anna said quietly. "Create enough problems, enough stress, enough expense, and eventually people give up and sell." Then I thought about the look on Vivian's face when Oscar had told her the construction would have to stop, the way her shoulders had sagged just for a moment before she'd straightened up and fought back. "How many people have actually sold?" I asked. "For families so far," Peter said, consulting his notes. "Martinez on Oak Street, the Martinez, family on Pine, and 2 of the rental properties on Elm. And once they buy a property, they immediately tear it down," Roxanne added. "No preservation, no renovation, just demolition and new construction. Houses that families built their lives in," Vivian said softly. "Gone." The room was quiet for a moment, everyone thinking about what that meant. These weren't just buildings to the people in this room, they were homes. Repositories of memories, foundations for communities. "So what do we do?" I asked. "We fight back," Karen said simply. "We organize, we document everything, we support each other, and we make it clear that this neighborhood isn't going anywhere." "How do we do that, practically speaking?" Anna asked. "Several ways," Roxanne said, pulling out more papers. "First, we document every incident of harassment or intimidation, build a paper trail that we can take to the real authorities. Second, we research our property rights and make sure everyone knows exactly what they can and can't be forced to do. Third, we work together to handle any legitimate issues with our properties before Brookstone can use them as leverage. It's like finishing decks," Vivian said, looking at me with a small smile. "Exactly like that." Fourth, Roxanne continued, "we make this neighborhood so obviously thriving and united that any outside observer can see we're not going anywhere." "What does that look like?" Peter asked. "Block parties?" Anna said, warming to the idea. "Community projects? Show everyone, including potential investors, that this is a neighborhood people choose to live in." "I like it," Karen said. "But we need to be prepared for them to escalate. If Brookstone realizes we're organizing, they're going to push harder." "Let them," Vivian said, and there was something in her voice that made everyone look at her. "Spent 2 years watching someone I loved fight a battle he couldn't win. But this is a battle we can win. This is about the life we choose to build, not the one that gets forced on us." She looked around the table at her neighbors, her friends, and then at me. "Besides, we've got something Brookstone doesn't have." "What's that?" I asked. We actually care about this place. We know every garden, every family, every story. This isn't just real estate to us, it's home. The meeting went on for another hour, with people volunteering for different tasks and exchanging phone numbers and making plans for regular check-ins. By the time everyone started heading home, there was a sense of purpose in the room that hadn't been there when we'd started. As people filed out, Vivian and I found ourselves alone in her kitchen, surrounded by the remnants of pizza boxes and coffee cups and the scattered papers of resistance. "You know," she said, starting to clean up, "when I decided to fix this deck, I thought I was just trying to reclaim a piece of my backyard. And now I think maybe I was trying to reclaim a piece of my life, my community, a sense that I could still fight for things that matter." I helped her stack the papers, thinking about how much had changed since Monday morning. "For what it's worth, I think you're succeeding. We're succeeding," she corrected. I couldn't do this alone. None of us could. As I gathered my keys to leave, Vivian caught my arm. "Declan, thank you. Not just for the deck, but for all of this. For being here when it mattered. Thank you for letting me be part of it." Walking out to my truck, I realized that somewhere in the past week, I'd stopped being just a contractor, working on a deck, and started being a member of this community. Tomorrow, we'd finish the deck. But the real work, the work of building something together. Something worth protecting that was just beginning, and for the first time in a long time, I was excited about what came next. Friday morning brought more than just the usual coffee and construction noise to Maple Street. By 8 a.m., there were 6 vehicles parked along the block, not just my truck and the neighbors' cars, but a news van from the local station and what looked suspiciously like a private investigator taking photos from across the street. "Well," Karen said, arriving with her usual tray of muffins, "looks like we've attracted some attention." The news crew turned out to be following up on a tip about neighborhood resistance to development. And the photographer was indeed working for someone, though he wouldn't say who. But what really caught my attention was the young woman who knocked on Vivian's door around 9:30, carrying a clipboard and wearing the kind of earnest expression that usually belonged to college students or activists. "Mrs. Harrington, I'm Sarah Chen from the Millbrook Heights Gazette. I understand you're leading some kind of community organization effort." Vivian looked flustered. "I wouldn't say leading. She's being modest," Anna said, appearing with what was apparently becoming the standard neighborhood coffee and snack service. "Vivian's house has become headquarters for the whole street." "Can I ask what prompted this organization?" Sarah asked, pulling out a recorder. "Have you heard of Brookstone Development?" Peter asked, joining the impromptu press conference on Vivian's front porch. For the next hour, we found ourselves explaining the situation to reporters, photographers, and what turned out to be a representative from the county planning office who'd heard about the fake city inspector incident. Minute I was installing deck railings, the next I was explaining building permits to a newspaper reporter. "This is getting complicated," I said to Vivian during a brief break in the media circus. "Good," she said firmly. "Complicated means people are paying attention, and attention is the last thing Brookstone wants." She was right. By noon, we'd had visits from the mayor's office, a representative from the state attorney general's Consumer Protection Division, and someone from the Better Business Bureau who was very interested in documenting fraudulent business practices. But Brookstone wasn't sitting idle either. Around 2 p.m., while I was working on the final section of decking with Peter and a few other neighbors who'd volunteered to help, a truck pulled up that I recognized immediately, the same oversized white pickup from the day before. But this time, Oscar wasn't alone. He was accompanied by 2 other men in expensive suits and a woman carrying what looked like legal documents. "Mrs. Harrington," the woman called out as they approached the backyard. "I'm Janet Morrison from Morrison Legal Services. We have a cease and desist order regarding this construction project." Vivian emerged from the house, and I could see her. Jaw set in the way I'd learned meant she was ready for a fight. "Let me see it," she said, extending her hand. The woman handed over an official-looking document. Vivian read it carefully, her expression growing more incredulous with each line. "This is ridiculous," she said finally. "This claims I'm violating noise ordinances, property line restrictions, and environmental protection laws for a deck."
Okay.
"Ordinances are quite clear," Oscar said smugly. Construction of this nature requires environmental impact assessment, geological surveys, and neighborhood impact studies. For a deck that's replacing an existing deck on the exact same footprint, Peter asked, the law doesn't distinguish between new construction and reconstruction in cases involving structures over 200 square feet, Janet Morrison said smoothly. I looked at the papers Vivian was holding. Something about them bothered me beyond just the obviously frivolous nature of the claims. Can I see that for a second? I asked. Vivian handed me the document. I studied it carefully, looking at the letterhead, the signatures, the official seals. This is interesting, I said slowly. According to this, the complaint was filed by the Millbrook Heights Environmental Protection Agency. That's correct, Janet Morrison said. The thing is, I continued, Millbrook Heights doesn't have an environmental protection agency. We're too small. Environmental issues are handled by the county. The lawyers exchanged quick glances. Furthermore, came a voice. From behind us, this document references municipal codes that don't exist. We all turned to see a woman in her 50s approaching, carrying a briefcase, and wearing the kind of confident expression that suggested she knew exactly what she was talking about. I'm Linda Walsh, she said, extending a hand to Vivian. An attorney with the County Legal Aid Society, Stara Chen from the Gazette, called me about your situation. She looked at the legal documents, scanning them quickly. These are fabricated, she said flatly. The formatting is wrong. The case numbers don't follow county protocol. And as your contractor pointed out, half the agencies referenced don't exist. Now wait just a minute, Oscar started. No, you wait, Linda Walsh said, and there was steel in her voice. What you're doing here constitutes fraud, harassment, and possibly extortion. Suggest you leave immediately before I call. The actual authorities? The Brookstone representatives began backing toward their vehicles, but Janet Morrison tried one more approach. Mrs. Harrington, you should know that this kind of resistance is futile. Brookstone Development has the resources to make your life very difficult if you continue to refuse reasonable offers. Is that a threat? Linda Walsh asked, pulling out her phone. It's a statement of fact, Janet Morrison replied. Good, because I'm recording this conversation, and threatening homeowners is a federal crime. Within minutes, the Brookstone crew was gone, leaving behind a group of neighbors, reporters, officials who were all looking at each other with a mixture of disbelief and determination. Well, Karen said finally, I guess we know they're taking us seriously. The question is, Anna said, what do they try next? Linda Walsh was already making notes. I'm going to file complaints with the State Attorney General's office and the FBI's white-collar crime division. This kind of systematic fraud usually means there are victims in other towns too. As the crowd began to disperse, Vivian and I found ourselves alone on the nearly completed deck. You know, she said, looking out at the chaos of news vans and official vehicles that had taken over her quiet street. When I woke up this morning, I thought the most stressful part of my day would be choosing deck-stained colors. And now I think we might actually be winning. She was right. Looking around at the neighbors organizing, the officials investigating, the reporters documenting, I realized that what had started as a simple home improvement project had become something much bigger. We weren't just building a deck anymore. We were building a community strong enough to protect itself. Tomorrow, we finish the deck, I said. Tomorrow we finish the deck, she agreed. And then we start working on everything else. As I packed up my tools, I couldn't help but smile. It had been one hell of a week. It wasn't over yet. Saturday morning should have been the triumphant completion of the deck project. Instead, I woke up to my phone buzzing with a text from Vivian at 6 a.m. Come over as soon as you can. We have a problem. I threw on clothes and drove to her house, expecting to find another visit from fake officials or maybe some vandalism. What I found was worse. Vivian was standing in her driveway holding an official-looking envelope, her face pale in the early morning light. Foreclosure notice, she said without preamble, handing me the papers. According to this, I'm 3 months behind on my mortgage payments, and the bank is initiating proceedings to reclaim the property. I looked at the documents. They appeared legitimate, proper letterhead from First National Bank of Millbrook, official seals, legal language that looked accurate. But you're not behind on your payments, are you? I asked. I've never missed a payment in my life, she said, her voice shaking with anger. I set up automatic payments after David died specifically so I wouldn't have to worry about this kind of thing. Karen appeared from next door, still in her bathrobe but carrying coffee. What's happening now? Vivian showed her the foreclosure papers. Karen's expression went from concern to fury in about 3 seconds. This is Brookstone again, she said flatly. They're escalating. How can they initiate foreclosure proceedings if she's current on her payments? I asked. They can't, came a voice from behind us. Linda Walsh was walking up the driveway, briefcase in hand, and looking like she'd been up all night. But they can create enough confusion and legal entanglement to make your life hell while you sort it out. How did you know to come here? Vivian asked. Because you're not the only one who got served this morning, Linda said grimly. I've gotten calls from 6 other homeowners in this neighborhood, all with similar notices. All claiming they're behind on payments they know they've been making. My phone rang. It was Peter. Declan, are you at Vivian's? Anna and I just got a foreclosure notice, but we refinanced last year, and our payments are automatically deducted. This doesn't make any sense. It's happening to everyone, I told him. Come over. Within an hour, Vivian's living room had filled with confused and angry neighbors, all holding similar foreclosure notices. Linda Walsh had spread paperwork across the coffee table and was examining each notice carefully. These are sophisticated, she said finally. Much more convincing than yesterday's fake cease and desist orders, but they're still fraudulent. How can you tell? Anna asked. Several things. The case numbers don't match county court formatting. The legal language contains clauses that aren't used in this state. Most importantly, she held up one of the notices. They all claim to be from First National Bank of Millbrook. What's wrong with that? Oh, Peter asked. First National Bank of Millbrook was bought out by Regional Trust 3 years ago, Roxon said, appearing in the doorway. I should know. I had to transfer my accounts when it happened. So these are completely fake? Vivian asked. Completely? Fake, but convincing enough that they might fool people into panic selling their homes to avoid foreclosure? Linda said. That's the point, Karen said, sinking into a chair. Create enough legal chaos and fear that people give up and sell. But this is different, I said, studying the papers. This isn't just harassment anymore. This is organized fraud on a large scale. Linda nodded, which means Brookstone is either getting desperate or they're more dangerous than we thought. Then, my phone rang again. The number showed up as First National Bank. This is probably them, I said. Should I answer? Put it on speaker, Linda said, pulling out her own phone to record. Hello, Mr. Rossi? This is Jennifer from First National Bank. I'm calling about the Harrington property on Maple Street. I understand you've been doing construction work there. Yes, I'm building a deck. Well, I'm afraid that's going to have to stop immediately. The property is entering foreclosure proceedings and no improvements can be made during that process. I see. You're calling me why? Because continued construction could be considered destruction of bank property, which is a felony. We'd hate for you to face criminal charges over this. Linda was frantically writing notes and making hand gestures. Can you provide me with some verification of this foreclosure? I asked. Reference numbers, documentation, that sort of thing? There was a pause. I'll have to transfer you to our legal department. That's fine. I'll wait. The hold music came on. Linda looked around the room at all of us. They're fishing, she said quietly. Trying to see how much you know and whether you'll back down. The music stopped. A male voice came on the line. Mr. Rossi? This is David Chen from our legal department. I understand you have questions about the Harrington foreclosure. Yes. I'd like to verify the legitimacy of this foreclosure. Since Mrs. Harrington believes her payments are current, I'm afraid I can't discuss details of our client's financial situation with a third party. But I can tell you that foreclosure proceedings are serious legal matters, and interfering with bank property can result in criminal charges. What bank property? I asked. Mrs. Harrington still owns her home. Not for much longer, if she continues to ignore her payment obligations. Linda was shaking her head vigorously and making throat-cutting gestures. You know what? I said. Think I should probably consult with Mrs. Harrington's attorney before we continue this conversation. Thank you for calling. I hung up before they could respond. Good, Linda said, because I've just been contacted by the Real Regional Trust Bank, and they have no record of any foreclosure proceedings against anyone in this neighborhood. The room was quiet for a moment as everyone processed what that meant. Said they're not. Just creating fake legal documents, Vivian said slowly. They're impersonating actual banks. Bank fraud is a federal crime, Linda said. This just escalated way beyond local harassment. What do we do now? Anna asked. Now we call the FBI, Linda said, already dialing. We document everything. Every call, every document, every interaction. As Linda made her call, I looked around the room at the faces of people who'd become my friends. My community, over the past week. They looked scared, but determined. Angry, but not defeated. You know what I think? I said finally. What? Vivian asked. I think we should finish that deck today. Whatever else happens, we started a project and we're going to complete it. Threatened you with criminal charges, Peter pointed out. Let them try to arrest me for building a deck on private property with proper permits, I said. I think a jury would find that interesting. Vivian smiled for the first time that morning. I like that plan. Besides, Karen said, if they're this desperate to stop us, we must be doing something right. By the time the FBI agents arrived an hour later, we had a completed deck in a neighborhood full of people who weren't going anywhere. The real battle was just beginning, but for the first time, I was confident we were going to win. Sunday afternoon brought what none of us expected. A knock on Vivian's door from Oscar Harrington himself, but this time he looked nervous rather than smug. Behind him stood two FBI agents in dark suits, and behind them, a small crowd of reporters who had apparently been tipped off that something big was happening. Mrs. Harrington, one of the agents said, I'm Special Agent Sarah Torres. We'd like to speak with you about Brookstone Development. Of course, Vivian said, stepping aside. Come in. What followed was the most surreal hour of my life, Oscar. It turned out wasn't actually working for Brookstone. He was working for the FBI. Undercover, trying to gather evidence of the company's fraudulent practices. The fake city inspector routine, the phony legal documents, even the threatening. Phone calls, all of it, had been monitored and recorded as part of a federal investigation. We've been tracking Brookstone for 18 months, Agent Torres explained as we gathered in Vivian's living room. They've run this same scam in 12 different towns across 3 states. The problem was most victims were too intimidated to fight back, so we couldn't gather enough evidence for prosecution. Until now, the second agent, Agent Miller, added. Your neighborhood's resistance created exactly the kind of documented pattern we needed. Oscar looked genuinely apologetic. I'm sorry for the stress we caused. We had to make it look real, or Brookstone would have gotten suspicious. So they're actually being arrested? Anna asked. As we speak, Agent Torres confirmed. Coordinated. Raids in 5 locations. Bank fraud, mail fraud, wire fraud, conspiracy, extortion. They're looking at serious federal charges. Karen leaned back in her chair with satisfaction. Good, but the real surprise came when Agent Miller pulled out a folder. There's something else. Brookstone's financial records show they've been operating with funding from a shell company that's been under investigation for money laundering. Learn. Your little neighborhood resistance may have helped us crack something much bigger. Over a deck, Peter said, shaking his head. All from fighting for what's right, Vivian corrected, as the FBI agents finished their interviews and left. Taking Oscar with them, we found ourselves alone on the completed deck for the first time since the whole ordeal began. The neighborhood was quiet again, the news vans had departed, and the only sound was the gentle creaking of new wood settling into place. So, I said, looking around at the group that had become my extended family, what now? Now we have that block party we talked about, Anna said. Celebrate the fact that we're still here. And plan the next project, Karen added. Peter's garage door has been sticking for months. The community garden needs new raised beds, Roxanne mentioned. I heard the Johnsons on Oak Street need their front steps repaired, Vivian said, then looked at me with a smile. Think you'd be interested in some more neighborhood work? I looked around at these people, my people now, and at the solid, beautiful deck we'd built together against all odds. It wasn't just about the construction anymore. It was about what we'd discovered we could accomplish when we worked together. When we refused to be intimidated, when we chose to build rather than give up. I said, I'd like that very much. As the sun set over Maple Street, we sat on Vivian's new deck, sharing coffee and stories and plans for the future. It had been the most eventful week of my life, and somehow it felt like it was just the beginning. 3 weeks later, I found myself back on Vivian's deck, but this time, I wasn't holding a hammer. I was holding a cup of coffee and watching the morning light filter through the trees in her backyard. The deck had weathered beautifully. The wood had settled into a warm honey color, and Vivian had added planters along the railing, filled with late-blooming flowers that somehow managed to look both organized and wild. You know, she said, settling into the chair next to me with her own coffee, I've been thinking about what you said that first day. What's that? It's about fixing things that are broken versus things that are just healing. She gestured around. At the deck, at her garden, at the neighborhood beyond. I think I understand the difference now. I nodded, thinking about how much had changed since that first Tuesday morning. Not just the deck, though that was beautiful and solid and exactly what she'd envisioned. The real changes were harder to see, but more important. I had coffee out here yesterday morning for the first time, she continued. Ow! Just me, my book, and the birds. And it felt ... right. Not like I was replacing David or forgetting him, but like I was making space for both the memories and whatever comes next. That sounds like healing to me, I said. It is, and you know what the funny thing is? I don't think I could have gotten here without everything else that happened. The fake inspectors, the legal threats, even the foreclosure scare. All of it forced me to decide what I was willing to fight for. Karen's voice called out from next door. Are you two having a philosophical discussion without inviting the rest of us? Within minutes, the deck had filled with the usual suspects. Karen with fresh muffins, Anna and Peter with their kids in tow, Roxanne with the latest neighborhood gossip. It had become our informal Sunday morning tradition, this gathering on Vivian's deck to share coffee and catch up on the week. Any word on the Brookstone trial? Anna asked. Linda says it's going well, Peter reported. Looks like they're going to plea bargain rather than risk a full trial. Could be looking at significant prison time, good Karen said with satisfaction. And I heard 3 other towns have come forward with similar complaints now that the story went national. Speaking of national attention, Roxanne said, did you see the article in Better Homes and Gardens about community organizing around home improvement projects? They used our story as the lead example. I had seen it, and it still felt surreal. To see our little deck project described as a model for neighborhood resistance and community building. The best part, Anna said, is what's happening in other places. Karen showed me emails from people in Ohio and California who started their own neighborhood watch groups after reading about us. It's like Vivian said, I added, sometimes fighting for what's right has effects you never expected. As the morning wore on and people drifted back to their own Sunday routines, Vivian and I found ourselves alone again. Declan, she said quietly, can I tell you something? Of course. She was quiet for a moment, looking out at the garden where the last of the summer vegetables were giving way to fall plantings. That day you asked me what you were doing here, whether you were trying to fix me. I said no, that I wasn't broken. But the truth is, I felt pretty broken back then. And now, I feel like I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. Not because everything's perfect, but because I know I can handle whatever comes next. Does that make sense? I thought about my own journey over the past month. The handyman who'd shown up to build a simple deck, focused on keeping his head down, and his life uncomplicated, felt like a different person. This version of me was part of something bigger, invested in a community, connected to people who mattered. It makes perfect sense, I said. When for what it's worth, I feel the same way. We sat in comfortable silence, watching the neighborhood wake up around us. Somewhere in the distance, I could hear the sound of a lawnmower and kids playing. The ordinary sounds of people living their lives in the place they'd chosen to call home, so Vivian said eventually, ready for your next project. Always, I said. What did you have in mind? She smiled. I was thinking we might need to expand this deck. Add a pergola, maybe some built-in seating, Make room for bigger gatherings. I looked around at the space we'd created together, imagining the possibilities. I think that sounds perfect, I said. After all, we'd learned that the best things were built one board at a time, one day at a time, one relationship at a time. And we were just getting started. 6 months after I first knocked on Vivian Harrington's door to fix a rotting deck, I found myself standing in the same spot, but everything had changed. The deck was no longer just a deck, it had become the unofficial town square of Maple Street. We'd added the pergola Vivian had suggested, built-in benches along the railings, even installed string lights that made the whole space glow warmly in the evenings. But more than that, it had become a symbol of what happens when people refuse to give up, when they choose to build instead of surrender. When they discover that the most important structures aren't made of wood and nails, but of trust and shared purpose. "You ready for this?" Vivian asked, adjusting the microphone that Peter had set up for the occasion. Today was the official dedication of what the City Council had designated as the Maple Street Community Initiative, a neighborhood program that had grown out of our resistance to Brookstone and was now being studied by urban planners across the country. What had started as one woman's decision to fix her deck had somehow become a model for grassroots community organizing. "As ready as anyone can be for a speech they never thought they'd have to give," I said. The backyard was full of people, not just our core group of neighbors, but families from across Millbrook Heights, city officials, reporters, and even a few academics who were writing papers about community resilience. It was surreal to think that this all began with a conversation about rotted deck boards. When it was my turn to speak, I looked out at the crowd and realized I knew exactly what I wanted to say. 6 months ago, I thought I was here to fix a deck, I began. I thought it was about replacing rotted wood, tightening loose railings, making sure Mrs. Harrington had a safe place to sit with her morning coffee. I paused, looking at Vivian, who was beaming with pride. What I learned is that sometimes when you think you're fixing something simple, you're actually building something profound. This deck became a gathering place because the people who built it understood that construction isn't just about materials, it's about intention. We weren't just laying boards, we were laying the foundation for a community that could stand up for itself. The crowd was quiet, listening. Vivian taught me that there's a difference between things that are broken and things that are healing. A broken thing can't function, it needs to be replaced or repaired. But something that's healing is already working. It just needs time and care and the right conditions to become whole again. I gestured to the neighborhood around us, to the faces of people who'd become family. This community was never broken, it was healing. And sometimes healing requires you to stand up and fight for what matters. Sometimes it means refusing to be intimidated by people who want to tear down what you've built. Sometimes it means discovering that you're stronger together than you ever imagined you could be alone. I looked directly at Vivian then, remembering the moment that had brought us all together. A wise woman once told me that in 51 years, she'd never felt the way she felt when people started believing in what we were building here. Well, Vivian, I want you to know that in 38 years, I never felt like I'd belonged somewhere until I helped build this deck with these people. The applause was warm and genuine, but what mattered more was the look in Vivian's eyes, a mixture of joy and satisfaction and the kind of deep contentment that comes from knowing you found your place in the world. Later, as the crowd dispersed and we cleaned up the remnants of the celebration, Vivian and I found ourselves alone on the deck once more. "So," she said, "what do you think David would have made of all this?" I thought about the man I'd never met, but had come to know through Vivian's stories. Through the unfinished projects in her garage, through the love that still filled this house. "I think he would have been proud," I said. "Not just of the deck, but of what you built afterwards, of the person you became when you decided to fight for what mattered." She smiled, looking out at the neighborhood that had become home to both of us. "You know what the best part is?" she said. "What's that?" "We're still building." And we were. Tomorrow we'd start work on the community garden expansion. Next month we'd help the Johnsons with their front steps. Next year, who knew what we'd take on together? But tonight, we sat on our deck, the deck that had started it all, and watched the sun set over Maple Street, content in the knowledge that sometimes the most important thing you can do is pick up a hammer and start. Building something that matters. Sometimes fixing a deck isn't just about the deck. Sometimes it's about fixing your life, one board at a time. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.